Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to an impromptu stream of Real Talks. I'm your host, David Steele, along with my good friend Matthew. How are we, Matthew?
I'm doing fine today.
Fantastic. Um, so today, because this had been recorded before and technical difficulties and whatnot, you guys are going to get a treat, and you guys are going to be actually. We are recording. This is a live stream, but I'm going to wait. If you don't watch it now, you're going to have to wait till May 1st in order to have this. But we are going to be doing May's perfect movie right now. And May's perfect movie is going to be Empire Strikes Back. One of the most classic Star Wars films of all time. Um, and arguably, and I think a lot of critics would say this, the best Star Wars film of all time. And I know there's been a lot of them. So this, and it's hard to believe that this was done in 1980. I feel so old just even saying that. So yeah, this was done back in 1980, and it obviously continues the story of the 1977 movie Star Wars, done by George Lucas. Um, we're doing this for the perfect movies because obviously I think it's a perfect movie. Um, and believe it or not, this was only made on an $18 million budget, but nonetheless. So let's just. What were your first memories of Star Wars: Empire Strikes Back, Matthew?
Oh boy. Um there's a lot. I remember I know my aunts and uncles were particularly really loving the hell out of the Star Wars, particularly Empire. In fact, my mom remember seeing Empire first before she saw A New Hope. Um because I guess by then, Star Wars had become more popular than it was in 1977 when it first came out. It was a bit more accessible for them. Um, and I think it was one of my aunts had was it her and their boyfriend at the time. Um, they had a copy of the original Star Wars trilogy on VHS, and I remembered. I don't know if they either decided to throw it on or whatever. But if anyone out there hasn't gotten a chance, maybe I'll see if I can provide a link for it on YouTube when this finally goes up or whenever it goes up. Of what the video was on each of the video cassettes, which was like, own these, theatrical versions, on VHS one last time, and that's what it was, and that's how I watched these films on. And then you have the Leonard Maltin, Q&A with George Lucas, in front of each of them. And yeah, like I said, yeah, I've been watching these for a long time, ever since then. In fact, when they had it was like 2020, they did a re-release for this. I got a chance to watch it at both the Garden Drive-In I'm at, which is about like a 30-minute drive from here where I'm at, and I ended up going to see it again at my local Cinemark, because they were having it on the big screen. I thought, you know what? Fuck it. It's like what, $5, I think it was. I was like, I'm gonna go see this. And yeah, no, I think it's yeah, a really great sequel. And yeah, I would love to get more into why I think it's like one of the best sequels out there.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing movie for a number of different reasons. And so we always talk about sequels and how it drives Hollywood or whatever, but to make a good movie is one thing, to make a sequel, okay, to make a perfect sequel, and there are only a few out there. I mean, we're going to be doing The Dark Knight later on this year, but um this is the first one that comes to mind every single time for a number of things. And, at the end of the day, okay, when push comes to shove, George Lucas is he was a visionary with this. And I the first thing I want to talk about really is the effects, because look, back in 1980, the effects were not, we didn't have all of these houses out there, these visual effects houses and everything else. And what they were able to do, and of course George Lucas founded, ILM, which is the perennial special effects house in the country, and for entertainment in Hollywood. Um, and it's just an amazing thought to see um, what he's done. Now, anybody, I should say this: anybody who's watched the Disney Plus um, series, it's a 6 episode series on IOM. I recommend that completely and highly because it's one of those things where if we don't get Star Wars, we don't have hundreds of movies many, many years later. I'm going to be doing a couple weeks. Going to be doing a Return of the Jedi video just on Mere Principle because that's turning 40. So yeah, talk to me about the effects now and then. Like, how well do you think they were done? And do you find them corny back then, or
No, I mean, like, the original trilogy's effects do hold up. I will say that, like, even if they are a bit dated, there is that a bit of like nostalgia factor to them, where it's like, yeah, they're a bit cheesy and corny, but they are still like effective enough to the story. Like, they don't take me out of it. Obviously, the effects here are a little bit more groundbreaking than the first one because we didn't have to deal with like an asteroid, flight sequence going on. We didn't have to deal with, like was it dealing with like a was it a practical Yoda puppet on set, things like that. And there's other elements too that we'll get into, but yeah, no, I think the effects work overall is still holds up pretty well. Although I will say the special edition versions that they've been releasing, and it's now unfortunately ingrained in future releases of these original trilogies, and even to a certain degree the prequels as well. Um, they are instantly dated because of how you could tell these were like, late 90s, early 2000s, VFX kind of work, which is what I've always had a problem with Lucas as a filmmaker, where he just cannot, like, it's one thing if you're going to do like all these, added changes to your film, especially updating some of the visual effects works. That's fine, but you gotta let us watch the original theatrical cuts, you idiot. Okay, like that's why I gave him shit for THX 1138, I think it was called, which was his directorial debut, and it was like a based off a thesis project he had in college at, I think it was University of Southern California, I think it was, and yeah, I have an issue with that, but that's a whole other topic we could talk about some other time. But like I said, as far as the visual effects work, it holds up fairly well. Um, yeah, I don't really have an issue there.
yeah, no, I mean, well, even going back to watching how the effects was done, and I was watching a documentary last night on Disney Plus, and they were talking about how they actually had to, um, do the tauntaun, that sequence in the beginning of the film with that tauntaun, one frame at a time, and really
Yeah.
get, and it was just fascinating the painstaking time that they put into this, and it was just unbelievable. Um, so we have one of the viewers even talking about with the AT-ATs, and you're right, George. With the AT-ATs, it's the same premise because it's one of those things. Now, it's actually interesting because they shot this in Norway, okay, which
Mhm.
and you were telling me, tell me about so you were telling me before we went on the air. Tell me about the gentleman that passed away prior to the or on the production on the
Uh,
set.
it it was John Barry. I was just reading, like, just skimming over some of the Wikipedia stuff. I'm reading here. Second unit director John Barry, who was a well-known production designer for the first Star Wars film and won an Academy Award for it. He had died as they were creating some of the set work involved. He was 43 years old. I don't even know what the conditions were of how he died.
But
Um,
wow, that's crazy. So, I mean, just the simple fact of you actually losing somebody on the production. But we do have a couple of. I'm going to save them just as a little treat for everybody because go ahead.
okay, I'm reading this just as just I'm reporting the news, folks. Meningitis he died from.
Okay,
Um, yeah, so that's why. Okay,
but um,
John Barry died from meningitis at 43.
um,
So
we actually have a couple of photos um, Ralph McQuarrie and set photos, and we'll
Yes.
leave those. We'll talk about that a little later because when you see the design about what it was and what it is now, um, it's just amazing. So speaking of, I mean, we were just talking about Hoth, right? So this is actually one of the designs. This was actually the Rebel base, um, and how it was, how the storyboard looked, and how they wanted to actually, you know, make this for the film. Um, but yeah, so I mean, being up in Norway, stop motion. It's just incredible what George was talking about with the AT-ATs, how they did special effects. I mean, we always talk about Star Wars in the story and in the music. The effects though were revolutionary, and it just continued. So they moved once they did this, they moved their offices up to San Francisco, and once ILM started to grow, you have to remember that you had a lot of friends around the same time. You had George Lucas, you had Steven Spielberg, you had Francis Ford Coppola. You know, um, right around this time, there was another little movie, okay, in 1981 called Raiders of the Lost Ark, and of course Harrison Ford. I mean, he owned the whole '80s, being in both those franchises, but so he ends up going to do Raiders of the Lost Ark too. Um, but it's just back to Empire real quick. It's just amazing to see all these sketches so many years later of the different things because you have a better appreciation. Um, yeah, so it's amazing in that respect. Um, so let's move on real quick, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Let's talk about let's talk about the story. The story is what drives any movie and all movies. What made this story that much better to stand out to any other movie? Let's say
Well, I
Jedi
mean,
or anything else.
yeah, as Lucas had stated, he had originally created this whole like I according to him, I mean, for all we know, he could be a lying piece of shit, but we don't know that. But from according to him, he had stated that he had created a full, like just vomited, all this material out that would eventually be the three films, and eventually he realized, okay, I need to. There's no way any studio is gonna pitch these stories or these ideas that I have. So he decided, compromise and just focus on like the first act of the story, which was A New Hope. This second part of the original trilogy's Empire Strikes Back, which is sort of like the midsection of the film. And even Irvin Kushner, who was I believe, a film professor of George Lucas and the director of Empire Strikes Back, uh, said that it was already tough as it was because he didn't really have a like satisfying um, climax or resolution, and he needed something to back him up, and having the twist that we'll get to in a minute or so. But I think what also stands out about this one is that it's not, and this is what goes back into why I think it's such like a really perfect sequel, or at least a really good landmark of how sequels should, really great sequels should do when they continue their franchises, like we're always getting, year after year, and, day after day practically, is they're not just repeating the same beats of the first one. They're not pulling a Hangover 2 on us. They're not pulling a Taken 2 on us where it's just the same story over and over again, where it's like, oh, where it's like those films, it's like, like with this one, it's not like, oh gee, we got another ball of destruction that's gonna destroy planets or ships. We gotta go after it and rescue another damn princess all over again. Like the Hangover is like, oh man, we screwed up and we got hungover and we don't know what's going on. It's not that at all, and it's very much the rebels are on the run throughout the whole film. Luke has his own personal journey, which is a very an interesting journey to say the least, both spiritually and personally to him. And it's also a physical demanding one too, with what Luke has to go through with that training aspect of it. But I just think like the story itself is really what stands out. And again, they could have easily done a repeat of what the first one did, especially with how much money the first one made. it won like 6 competitive Academy Awards and got George Lucas a Best Director nomination. And it, did all these things, got a Best Picture nomination too. They could have easily done a repeat of the first one, but the fact that they said no, we're gonna take the story, add a bit more complexity to the characters, have them a bit more of a nuance to them, add a little bit more depth to them. Even having Solo practically complete his arc in this film with his whole sacrifice he makes in Bespin City. And yeah, I just there's enough in there that stands off that that stands out as like a really solid story. And on top of that too, we have to keep this in mind, uh, David, is that this was to prove this entry, for better or for worse, and whether you want to see it as this, it was set up as we need to see if the franchise really has legs and actually can move forward with its own franchise. Like the first one got lucky. We have to keep in mind when the first one came out, it was like either during the Vietnam War or we were just coming out of it. And, we were all depressed and we're like, well, what the, like, well, it's a really, dark and depressing time that we're in. And the first one came out, I was like, hey, that was a big surprise. What a huge success it was. Kids are lining up to go see the first one. And now this one's like, okay, what do we do? Like, what's a way that we can get audience, both adults and kids, entertained by watching this movie? And again, it's just again what I said, just adding more complexity to the characters. You're doing something completely different, and on top of that, it really did kind of start asking questions of like, okay, maybe this franchise isn't so black and white with its characters. There's a bit of like a gray balance in between everyone, especially our main villain, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think that's what made the story in Empire Strikes Back stand out more. And again, it's a much bigger risk. It's one thing if you got a great first follow up, but now it's almost like, okay, what do you have here that's like worth continuing the franchise? Is this worth milking out? Because, like I said, we've seen hundreds and hundreds of franchise attempts like keep going out. In fact, we're actually getting what was it, like a fifth installment as we speak of Evil Dead Rise coming out next Friday. So we'll see how audiences react to that. So yeah, again, like it's challenging, and I'm surprised they were able to pull it off. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really good story.
So, a couple of things. Number one, usually shoots, okay, the studios try to get shoots in, I won't say relatively quickly, 60, 70, 80 days. This shoot was 6 months. This shoot was 6 months. So
Yeah,
from it went from March 5th, okay, 1979, and it ended September 24th. Okay, 203 days. And that's not even talking all of the posts that it had to go through. So forget about that. Moreover, so you talked about the characters, having to get kids and adults engaged. This movie, what it does, because I think you may have said it off air, it rests on a puppet for almost 30 minutes of the movie, and that's Yoda.
yeah,
And Yoda, of course, is, the uber Jedi. And so when he has to go to Dagobah to learn how to be a Jedi for his training, you have this little puppet. It and just in talking backwards, not really that cute. So he's not like a Grogu, you know. And so it's like, how are we going to make this fascinating? And the other thing too is our main protagonists are completely separated for the first two acts of the movie. Like we have Luke over there in one place in Dagobah, and we have Han and everybody else trying to chase down, trying to get away from the Empire in some capacity
yeah.
until the third act. Um, so really,
Even
it's go ahead.
even Han and Luke, they don't even meet after Hoth. ever again in person. Like,
No.
sure, Luke sees Han and Carbonite in Carbonite towards the end, but they never really meet after they say their farewells on Hoth, right? As Luke's about to fight the AT-ATs in
Hmm.
Empire on the snow battle. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
so
just an amazing thing how they kept that together. Um, and it was the story, and it was really the story. And the other thing, I mean, it's interesting because you have this little character in Yoda who is basically talking backwards and is being mysterious, but yet we use his philosophical things to this day.
yeah, and
There is no try, do it, do, and it's
but also
amazing. Go ahead.
I would also argue too, like that, like even for like little kids, because I didn't even notice this even as a little kid, but it really does show the idea of like size doesn't matter, and even with the idea of like looks can be deceiving, because when we were introduced to Yoda, by the way, great performance by Frank Oz, because that's another crucial aspect that wouldn't have worked with Yoda if they didn't get a great puppeteer and a really good voice actor like Frank Oz to play that role so well. Um, but it really did, like, him as a character and the way that Yoda is being played off as like this goofy, wacky creature. And you turn out, no, he's like one of the greatest Jedi masters of all time, or at least so we're being told by Ben Kenobi. Um, and it's almost like a lesson even for little kids to be like, okay, yeah, the looks aren't, they can be deceiving, like a person may look, like a someone who who's like was it a who's got like a bag of bricks as a brain, but in reality they could be like the smartest guy in the world. So yeah.
Well, and here's the thing: Frank Oz was not originally coined to do that job. That was Jim
Correct.
Henson. Jim
Yeah.
Henson was actually the one. Of course, he was doing the Great Manhattan Muppet Caper, and he actually suggested Frank Oz to George Lucas, or maybe it wasn't that, but somehow or another, Oz got the
it
job because of that.
Yeah, it was Jim Henson, right? Yeah, Jim Henson. He was the one who actually was it was, yeah, you're right. Like either George Lucas or someone in the producing crew said, asked Jim Henson, "Hey, could you help us with the Yoda puppet?" And he goes, I don't really have the time. I think he was off doing Muppet stuff. I could be wrong because I'm not familiar with the Jim Henson lore like a lot of people are. Sorry. And he said, but I could recommend to you my good buddy Frank Oz who could help out, and that's how the whole thing, as you said, started.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but yeah,
it Yoda is just it's an amazing character. Um, let's so the other thing I want to talk about too, and we're going to touch upon a couple of things, but the other thing I want to touch upon too is the use of colors in this film. And there are films that use color very well.
mhm.
I'm just going to say Star Trek, the '08 one with the bright lights by J.J.
Yeah,
Abrams. But moving back to
lens
that,
flares. Yeah.
yep. So this one here, and this is a perfect shot of what I'm referring to. We have here
Yes.
the silhouettes are amazing. We have two silhouettes. And by the way, this is done plenty of times in filmmaking, guys. Okay. I mean, all you got to do is take a look at the Batman from last year. Okay. When it's done well, you get a fantastic result. That almost looks like a comic book type of thing. You have two
Mhm.
people here in a silhouette. Okay. Completely dark, the blue light behind them, and then you have their lightsabers light everything up. Unbelievable job.
Yeah. The
Unbelievable
the
job.
best the best way actually to get colors like this, and you could argue the same thing with poster designs, at least the really good ones, is when they have colors that are opposite from each other but are very complementary towards each other. So the blue and orange that you see here is very much complementing each other because they're both different shades of their own color, but at the same but again, like, they're able to complement each other really well. In fact, I'm glad you brought this scene up because I was going to bring up earlier with the production design, which is really fantastic, and it got nominated for an Academy Award for that. It did win, of course. It lost to Roman Polanski's Test, which I still need to watch. Um, but the late Norman Reynolds, who just passed away recently, I think it was less than a month ago or so. He had just passed away. Um, him and his team did a really good job creating all the set designs on this film. I'm pretty sure he also worked on the first one and Raiders of the
Yes.
Lost Ark, and
Yes.
I think Return of the Jedi. I could be mistaken. I'll have to look that up in a second. But what I love about this set here in particular is I love that up to this point, Luke's journey. There's so much I could talk about with the scene that's so great, but Luke's journey up to this point has always been much like spoilers, like his own father, who's very much he thinks he's very arrogant. He wants to sort of jump a couple of lessons ahead. He thinks, oh, I got this. I could take this guy down or whatever, and that ego kind of gets the best of him, especially in this fight. Um, Especially when Yoda keeps telling him, like, do not skip these lessons. Even if your friends are in danger, these lessons are important, so that way you'll be able to save the whole galaxy. And he just said, "Screw it! I'm just going to go ahead, face off Vader, even if I'm not ready to as a Jedi." And this whole set design here, I love that, and it took me until like 5-10 years ago maybe to realize this, that the whole set where Vader and Luke face off for the very first time in the Carbonite area looks like Luke is in hell. And I love the way that the colors are used. Again, the blue and orange matching each other, and the shadows. And it also feels very much, you could also argue a little bit of the Jedi as almost like these like lone samurais, especially in this series. Because it took me until I think it was like the recent like Fallen Jedi Order game that was with the I can't remember the guy, the orange haired kid. I can't
Yeah.
remember. I think he was on like the Arkham or Gotham show. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that much.
I
But
know what you're referring to.
it took me until that game to realize that what makes these the Star Wars series to me stand out compared to other science fiction fantasy kind of lore is the way that George Lucas, when he created these lightsabers and the Jedi and the Sith, they're very reminiscent of old Akira Kurosawa's films, like Seven Samurai, some of the other stuff that he had done in his own right as a filmmaker, and you see that influence a bit in some of this lore, especially with the way that some of these characters we see even in other stories, where after Order 66, where they're this like lone Jedi, almost like a lone samurai going out, on their own and with their own little quirky adventure or a cool adventure. Um, and it just has this like really cool vibe to it. And again, I keep reiterating this over and over again, that the way that Lucas iterates like these aren't just lightsabers that come right out of the hilt or whatever. They feel very reminiscent of like samurai swords. Like you must take care, like even Obi-Wan said in one of the films, like this weapon is your life, and that's essentially, I'm pretty sure that that's essentially what these weapons are, much like how they were to samurai themselves, but almost again to the Jedi and to the Sith, where their weapons are a part of them. And I love that again Lucas, took that inspiration from Akira Kurosawa's samurai films and placed it in this Star Wars lore, despite it being, not even being set in like a present day society. It's like I said, leagues and leagues of galaxies ahead of us in terms of like time. But he does it in such an interesting way, and again, it goes back into the stories of like, oh, you're actually doing something a little bit interesting and new to this franchise, and you're not just replicating what you love as a kid, you're actually adding something more to it that actually can stand on its own while being an influence from your past artists, or past filmmakers that we've had. So, but yeah, but there's so much more I could talk about this scene, but that's just scratching the surface of why I love this scene in particular. And yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean it's one of those scenes that, as you said, you could talk about for hours. Um, it's an amazing scene just in general. Um, so this is actually, so we're gonna actually go into the. So speaking of the carbonite scene, so you were talking about the carbonite scene. This is
Yeah.
actually one of the other mock-ups for the carbonite scene. Um, and it just the, to see this and then to see what they actually produced is incredible. Um, but this is a great idea of what they first started with, and then how they were able to tweak it and everything else. Um, the color, I mean, obviously not in this photograph, but the color really comes through on the set when you were talking about earlier with the smoke. I mean, even that one shot, I don't have the picture for it, but even the one shot where you see the smoke rise and then Vader's
Yeah.
face, it's like, I mean, it's just shot after shot after shot. And getting back to what you were saying about his arrogance, Luke's arrogance, it's even that goes back to that scene when they're, when he asks him what's in the cave, and he said, you know, something. Yoda says something, and he's like, "You won't need your weapons." And he says he takes his lightsaber anyways, being that rebellious type of person. And of course, he ends up, you know, it's a mock thing of Luke's Darth Vader, but when he, you know, slices his head off, he sees his face, and it's like there's a premonition here that you might die. Um, but it's amazing to see all of the different things, and this movie didn't seem long. It was 2 hours long. I mean, it was uh, it was 124. It was 2 hours long, so it's not like it was anything dramatic. Um, Compared to what we have today, that's really short. But no, it's everything about this, from the production design to the story to the lighting. We were talking about the lighting earlier. I mean, even this shot here, you have the blue with the
Yeah.
black, going back. I mean, of course. So talk. So when was talk to me about the first time you heard let's go into the twist. The twist is, I think, one of the top three twists in cinema history. I mean, there's a couple others out there.
Yeah,
Nobody knew
it's like the
about
most
this.
popular twist out there easily. Like
Nobody,
every yeah.
nobody knew about this except George Lucas.
Yes. So it was George
Nobody.
Lucas, Irvin Kushner, and who was the other guy? Lawrence Kasdan was the other guy
The
who found
director.
out. I'm pretty sure. And so Lawrence Kasdan was the co-writer on the film. George Lucas was the executive producer and story credited. Irvin Kushner was the director. And then the producer, I think he was also another one too that knew about it. And I'm blanking on
Gary
his
Kurtz.
name. Gary
Gary
Kurtz.
Kurtz
Thank you
and,
very
and,
much.
and, and Rick McCallum.
So yeah, so well, no, Rick McCallum wasn't involved on these films until the prequels.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but he, so one day, like right before they're about to film this big moment in the film, uh, they created a false page, to notify, in case anything were to leak out to the public, and it did. They leaked out the fact that it was Alec Guinness was the one who killed Luke's father. Um, and that caused sort of like a big uproar. And even Mark Hamill was like, "Oh wow, that kind of puts a bit of a turn on the first one." With like, oh, maybe Ben Kenobi is kind of it's like conniving, evil character that we didn't realize him to be. And then right as they're about to shoot, I think Mark Hamill was in his room. It was in his wardrobe room or green room, whatever they call it, and Irvin Kushner came up to him and he said, "Okay, remember the line, that David Prowse, the late David Prowse, who's in the Darth Vader suit, by the way. We should also give a shout out to him because
Hmm.
he's not given enough credit for playing that character on set." And Irvin Kushner said to Mark Hamill, You do realize that that line about Alleganis, that's a false page. He goes, what? And he goes, all right, and he goes, here's the real page. And he read the page, and I think even Mark Hamill was like, oh, okay, all right. And so Irvin Kushner said to him, we're not even going to record what David Prowse says. Just act on your own instincts. Act, on your own to get into that emotion. And and so he did. And even when James Earl Jones finally voiced the character and he did the lines in ADR, he was told, like, even in the behind the scenes stuff, he's like, no, they're lying. No, Vader's lying. I wonder how they're gonna play that lie up in the film. And yeah, like, this was also the time, like you said, it's like 1979, 1980. This came out, where social media wasn't that big of a thing. We're not given these, like, articles and articles of spoilers ahead of time from, like, test screenings or any of these, like, online subreddits on Reddit pages, or on YouTube or whatever, leaks going out about, oh, this character died in the film, or oh, this happened in the movie, like, we're going to get time travel in the new Avengers movie or whatever. Um, None of that. So it's interesting to see how a film would have done now, how the film would have done if it came out now. Because I guarantee you the twist of this probably would have been revealed like a month in advance. Um, and I can't even
Huh.
remember what the reaction was for me or even any of my relatives themselves. Um, but it's definitely a shocking moment, and I think I did bring this up on our original recording we did before I got wiped away. When I brought this, I finally showed this to a very good friend of mine, Samantha Davis. I drove all the way to her house, and like begging her and her entire family to watch this movie because they'd already seen the first Star Wars film. They never watched any of the other ones. And I pleaded for Sam and her family to finally watch this. And when we got to the cave where Luke is fighting off like an imaginary version of Vader, and it's revealed the mask comes off and it's like a version of Luke. And right then and there, their mother figured out the twist. And I was like, nope. Like, right, she's like, oh, I figured it out. I'm like, no, 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 don't say anything. Wait until we get to the end and we'll talk about it. And right as they were, and I still have the audio bit on my phone. Sorry, guys, but I still have the audio bit on my phone, of the reaction to the whole thing. And yeah, Sam was very surprised. I think she was like hinted at a couple, like, before in her life. And but her younger sister, Sarah Davis, was completely caught off guard. She had no idea that this twist was coming. None of it. She wasn't even told anything about this at all. And every time that Samantha and I went to a public event prior, like when we went to semis and proms and whatnot as friends, um, we were always, anytime anyone brought up Star Wars, like, no, 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 don't say anything. Sam hasn't seen the movies.
No
Don't say
spoilers.
anything. He's like,
No
like,
spoilers.
shut up. Don't, just talk about something else. Don't talk anything about Star Wars. Because I actively wanted to make sure that she did not know anything about the movie. Um, and yeah, so yeah, it was a really great. It was really cool to see Empire with them because, again, it was their first time seeing it, and we'd watched it on like an original cut of the film to begin with. So it was almost kind of like if I were to go back in time to be like, I wonder what the reaction would have been like this. And again, throughout the whole time watching this movie with them, I kept thinking in the back of my head, oh, we're gonna stop the movie and be like, oh, sorry, Matt, we're a little bit tired. We're gonna go to
You're,
bed.
you're waiting.
Watch
You're
it some
waiting
other
for him
time.
to chime in and
I,
say, "Okay,
I'm
we can finish
waiting
this
for the
another
moment of
night."
like, yeah, like, this is too much for us because I think we were done with the movie at around like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, I think, which is usually like their bedtime or whatnot. But yeah, no, I was very surprised and very happy that they, at least one of them, didn't know about the twist prior to that viewing. Um, but yeah, that was. And then when the movie was done, I was like, I feel fulfilled. I had the biggest smile on my face. I'm like, I've just accomplished one of my greatest goals ever in my life by showing them this movie. So,
Yeah, it's just there's so many layers to this. There's so
yeah,
many layers to this, and um, first of all, I mean, we were talking about, I mean, just the color contrast, right? You were talking about that with the lightsabers. You have the black and the blue that make it look amazing. I mean, here's the other shot, okay? Right after that, he goes and he gets his hand cut off, and it's, I mean, it's still a little, the gray of Luke's kind of blend in, but I mean, it's just one of those things where this is one of the most, I probably can say top 30 moments in film history. I mean, just
Yeah.
in general. Um, but let's go back for a minute, because here's the other thing too. Darth Vader is the number one or number two greatest villains of all time. Think about that for a minute. There have been
Yeah.
thousands and thousands and thousands of villains over thousands and thousands and thousands of movies. And this man is the number one villain of all time. Um, just because of the complexity, just because of the battle, just because of the conflict, as they use, to the struggle. Because what happens when, I mean, going back to this scene, he says, no, he never told you what happened to your father. He's like, he told me
Yeah.
you killed him. He's like, no, I am your father. And
Yeah.
Luke just goes, he's like, no, I don't believe this. He's in total. Now he has to go through a whole other character. You know, he's at rock bottom at this point. He has to now go through this and come to grips with this. And we see him come to grips with this slowly but surely, all, at the end of Empire and all the way through Jedi. And my God, it's just so good. Um, this is one of those movies that you can just sit down. It doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter if it's Hoth or Dagobah. You can just sit down and watch this, and
Mm.
it's it's going to be good, and you may have seen it 5 or 6 or 7 times. Um, I think it's filmmaking at its best.
I want you to hold on to the shot right here because I actually want to talk a little bit about what I like about it visually in terms of like a cinematography standpoint.
Hmm.
Because I will say the one issue I usually have with the original trilogy, and it's very like they have a lot of like sporadic shots throughout the trilogy that stand out to me as like really good like cinematography. This is actually one of the few of them I remembered a lot, even now going through some of the production stills. Is I love how typically nowadays you would film it very much like in front of a green screen, um and it would be very much this like flat image of in terms of like shadows and composition. But I love how if you could see right where Luke's legs are, the camera is pointed up, or at least this picture of this uh uh
The still.
composure of it is standing up to where we're able to see the right amount of depth involved, in terms of like what would Luke's pretty much to show like Luke's kind of running out of options in a way of like either he walks forward on the chasm or he falls fucking downhill like a huge fall. This is practically like the Empire State Building, falling down from that, and like King Kong did. But I love that again, like typical any other director would film this very much like a flat image, have no use of depth within their film, especially creating a scene like this. And they were able, Irvin Kushner and the cinematographer, I'm blanking on his name, Peter Shutsky. I think I screwed his name up, but they what they were able to do creating this whole set piece here is great. And even right before they get to this moment in the film where Vader just pops right out of nowhere and is just towering over Luke, like, wailing at him with his saber. I love that there's a good amount of, like he's this like towering figure, like a David and Goliath scenario. And I love that they were able to frame him like that. And again, there's this overhead shot of where they're fighting it again. It's just like, right as
Mhm,
they're on the
mhm.
bridge,
Yeah,
and right as he pushes, Luke down, and pointing the lightsaber at him. It's just a great use of like depth of field. I think
absolutely.
that's the term, because it's been a while since I've been to film school,
Yeah,
but
no,
yeah,
no, and you're right. And it's the way it was shot. So you have all these different types of images. You have the overhead shot. You have the close up of Luke's face as Vader's saber is right there. You have the wide shot of the whole um, aisle, for lack of a better word. Um, and then you get here, okay, and you have the two shot, and it's just really well done. And to your point, I mean, so one of the next shots is he actually looks down and he sees how far it is, and he makes a decision. Okay, come with me, Luke. We can rule the galaxy as father and son. And of course, we all know what he chooses. But it's one of those things where it's just, and going back to the point of how they shot this, like Lucas was an absolute genius to put a false page in there. Genius,
what
genius
one
move.
of the few one of the few smart moves he's done. Yes.
Um, because he knew how big this was, and he knew what could happen. In He wanted to have a contingency plan, and it worked. Um,
Yeah.
it was
And the other
just
thing
go ahead.
the other thing I also want to say was also a really smart move on his opportunity was when he asked when he was shipping around the story for the first one, A New Hope. He had, I think I mentioned this on our original recording of this, maybe not, but he went to various studios to pitch him the script for the first one, A New Hope. And I remember Fox said we'll do it, and when it came time to uh trying to get the first film out in terms of like merchandising, uh Fox made the dumbest decision, which was like,
Well,
okay,
yeah.
where it was like, like I want the rights to the sequels, any sort of like intellectual property that comes out of this, the merchandising. I want to own that stuff. That'll be from me, and you guys. I can't remember the deal exactly. It was
So,
the
the
first
way
one.
it
It's
went
been a while.
was, and you're right. So the way it went was, he actually shopped A New Hope around. Four different studios declined
Yeah,
him. Universal, Paramount, they all said no, thanks. This
yeah.
is a joke. Fox was really on the brink of going, or so they were close to it, of going bankrupt, and they had nothing to lose. So at that point, what that ended up happening was they said, okay, you know what? Yep. And to your point, Matthew, he's like, yeah, but there's one caveat. I want all the rights to
Oh,
everything.
you know what? I just realized. I think it was he gave up his points on the
Yeah,
film on the back
because he
end,
knew.
and in return, I just in case this became a big success, I want the rights and merchandising of this franchise. And he
And
was so worried when he made this one that he would eventually have to ask Fox for an additional loan on the film, because at one point I think it was Bank of America said, "You guys are going a bit over budget on our loan. What the hell is taking so long? And we want to pull the funding right now." And so they ended up getting it reworked enough to where they were able to finish the rest of the film. He still maintained his creative control over the project. I think he might have also gave up his points on the back end for this one again. Um, but yeah, no, it paid off really well for Lucas, and
he used the profits from Star Wars to make
yep,
Empire.
yep, that's
So,
exactly what happened.
and what ended up happening too was, because of, so back then, Kenner, they were trying to figure this out. Kenner was the perennial toy company that was going to make these. They didn't know if this was going to do well or not. So they made some, okay? When this thing blew up and was the biggest film of 1977, they said, okay, we've got to get in front of this now. They started making those for Empire. I mean, once they got this what they needed to, they started churning those out for Empire Strikes Back, and the only way you could get those, because it was such demand for it, was through a catalog, service merchandise catalog. So that's like when Sears was huge back then. You have a phone book type of catalog, and there was a whole toy section, and you just flipped, okay, Kenner, okay, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and whatever else, and you put in the order form, and you shipped it out to them, and in 4 to 6 weeks, you got your toys because they couldn't keep them in stock. They
Yeah.
couldn't keep them in stock, and so he made so much money just from that.
Yeah.
It's insane. Um, Speaking of money, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but let's talk about something else that's really unnoticed, okay? And that is the music. The music in this movie. I mean, of course.
Sucks. No, I'm kidding.
No, it's terrible.
No. It's
The guy
fucking
only
amazing.
won 3 Academy Awards up to this point. No, but the music, the Imperial March, you can look at most films, okay? When you have music that is still recognizable to this day. I mean, they play it like the Imperial March, for example. They play it everywhere, sporting events, everywhere. Um, and that just goes to show you how good the music was.
They played it they played it also for the dark M&M chocolate ad they did in tie into Revenge of the Sith, which was it's still hilarious to me.
Yeah.
I know it's such a simple joke, but I still
No,
find
but
it I
it's
still find it
yeah,
funny.
it's good. I mean, you're able to, and to your point, Matthew, talk about longevity.
Yeah.
This franchise in itself, at its core, whether it's Star Wars, Empire, or whatever, these 3 films, okay, and when I do the Jedi video, we'll talk about it more, has ingrained ourselves. This is ingrained in pop culture. It doesn't matter what it could be. South Park, it could be Family Guy, it could be M&M's, it could be any anything.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have board games, you have video games, you have everything Star Wars. And it's just, so when you talk about something like Revenge of the Sith and how, the M&Ms and everything, but that's just, you don't get away with that unless this movie has that much longevity to it. But yeah. It, so talk about the music real quick and then go into the longevity. Like, what did you think of the Imperial March, or what do you think of it, as far as, does it work with the film, or?
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of question is that? I'm sorry.
No, I know.
The score the score I know you have to ask that question, so it's like I got to check mark this question off. But no, but the question is though, yeah, so yeah, the question is the score great? Yes, of course it was. Even back then, it was still amazing. I'm pretty sure that John Williams even got a BAFTA win for this for best original score, um, for his work on this. And yeah, no, it's just like a really good job. Like this is again at the height of his career as a conductor and as a composer. But yeah, no, it's yeah, the Empire theme again is another thing that had it stand out on its own. And did it recycle themes from the first one? Sure, at times it did, but it's also adding, like I said, I mentioned about the Akira Kurosawa influence, where it's not just adding stuff from what was well regarded before or pre-existing stuff, but you're also adding something new to it. The Imperial theme, because there wasn't really much of an Imperial march or a theme to it, or as people would like to call it, the Darth Vader theme, because it wasn't really there. And going back to Vader real quick, Vader wasn't really that much of like a main villain in the first one. He was more of like a second henchman. Whereas this one showed not only with his theme, but also the way that they set his character up is like this is the most badass villain and the most threatening guy on the planet. Because now, in the first one he was put on a leash because of Grand Moff Tarkin. Now he's given full authority to be like anyone who even looks at me the wrong way will get killed right on sight,
Well, and
and
that, to your
your
point.
body's gonna get dragged away.
Well, to your point, I mean, there's a perfect segue. So I mean, the simple fact of the admiral. I mean, so the admiral, he's like, "Don't fail me again," and so he gets, you know, so the next time he goes, comes out of hyperspace too quick, and
Yep.
he's like, he's much of a fool as he is stupid, and so he turns. I love it. He's sitting in his chair, and then he turns around and he's got the screen. Ah, Lord Vader, and he's like,
Yeah, kills him over a Zoom call
"Ugh."
practically. And he's
It's
doing
like,
this. He's doing this also without doing the hand motion, and he's doing this while having a conversation with another guy. While he's killing him slowly to death.
he's
That
like,
was another reaction I got from Sam Davis and her family was
uh,
like, "Oh wow, okay, like
yeah.
right off
So
the
he's
bat,
like,
this guy is like a foe to never mess with."
yeah. So he's like, "See, it's your show now. Don't fail me." He's like, "Yes, Lord
Yeah,
Vader." But it's like, and the other thing too you see is what they wanted to do is in what they did was he set up for the third film. I mean, if you want to call him, I mean, you're right. He was kind of like a proxy. I mean, we were
yeah,
introduced to the Emperor in this film, and you know, so the big bad, if you will, and he's Vader was just a proxy, and it's like okay, and the story continues and everything else, but it just so many good layers about this movie, and I wanted to. So we're in Cloud City now. We were talking about this. Here's another one of the sketches by
yeah.
Ralph McQuarrie, and of course this is in Cloud City and everything else. But it's like this is, I mean, almost identical to what he sees to what's in the film, and it's just um, it's amazing um, how accurate some of these drawings are. Um, and then this is it's just Cloud City in itself, though. I mean, talk about so. I mean, somebody we're not even bringing into the fray is Billy D. Williams. I mean, for
Yeah,
the
great,
short,
really great actor and a great performance from him.
yeah, for the short little portion he had was
Yeah.
really, really good. Um,
He's essentially the Black Clark Gable, like such a smooth talking,
yeah,
like as even Han calls him a smoothie. It's like, yeah, he's such a smooth motherfucker.
yeah,
Yeah, no, he's a really great addition to the film, and he's another one. I could be wrong in saying this, but as we were recording this episode, I was briefly looking up that Lando's character was actually changed sporadically throughout the production. I don't know what the original intention was as the character to the
hmm,
story, but apparently he was altered a good chunk by Billy D. Williams and Irvin Kushner while making the movie. I could be mistaken. That could be a rumor. I'll
interesting.
have to look more into that. But yeah, no, I really like Lando because he was in a way, he's kind of the character of what Han could have been had he not joined the Rebel Alliance and met Luke and Leia. Like this is the kind of scoundrel he was, that Han Solo was prior to teaming up, and it's almost in a way of like Lando being this old mirror that Han used to be. And now he's looking at that said mirror of like, wow, I used to be this much of an arrogant guy. Um, and Lando learns very quickly. Well, over the course of the film, I should say, he's learning the hard way of like, yeah, okay, you know what, Vader's being a dick. The Empire screwed me up on this opportunity I have to invest in the facilities here on Cloud City, on in Bespin, I should say, and I need to find my way out of this deal, and get out of it quick before I get screwed
Well,
over by Vader.
to your point, so so when Vader's torturing Han and he walks out, he's like, the Wookiee and are to be left here. He's like, no,
Yeah.
yeah, bring him to my
That was
ship.
never
It's
the
like, no,
agreement.
that was never the agreement. Be glad that I'm not altering the agreement anymore. It's
Yeah.
like this deal's getting worse and worse. So
It,
that's when
that
he, stages that coup. But
that
it's not
that
not
whole
so much a coup, but
yeah. That whole scene, I'm being
hmm,
reminded of the Robot Chicken sketch, if you ever saw it, where like,
yeah.
have you ever seen it with Lando being given like a tricycle and then like a tutu suit? That
I'll have
that
to look
that
into
scene still
that.
cracks me up. And the other one was when Harrison Ford's being I'm looking through real quick with Harrison's filmography because there's one. Well, I mean, there's a ton of movies. You know, Harrison Ford's done a lot of great stuff. You know, Star Wars, Raiders of the
He
Lost
he's
Ark, Blade
owned
Runner.
he owned 15
But
years. He had
yeah, but
I
but
mean, go ahead.
yeah, we also have to keep in mind he's also done a lot of shit. Like, let's not
Yeah.
forget that. You know, like like you can list off like any like shitty movie, and you're like, wow, I guess Vader really did hate Paranoia that much to where
Yeah.
he's like torturing the shit out of him.
Yeah.
I always crack that joke around like, wow, I guess he really hated Paranoia.
Yeah.
Um, okay,
But
but
it's
yeah, so yeah,
no, I mean, one of the others. Okay, so that was the Han one. But yeah, it's one of those things where this movie is just there isn't a false note. And it's I would have been curious to your point you asked earlier. I'd have been curious to see if this had been released today, how much money this would have made. Because 18 I mean, it made worldwide, it made $538 million and it grossed
yeah.
292 million here in the States. Um, I think this probably could have been $1 billion movie.
It probably would have done about as well as
Or
Last Jedi did.
close to it.
Yeah, because I think the Last Jedi, that's a very similar. Although I don't think the Last Jedi, and we could talk about this some other time. I don't think the Last Jedi is that much of an impactful film in terms of like storytelling and sequels to begin with. But it is kind of like the riskier, like of the main films that have come out. It's been like the most riskiest one, you know, since Empire. Honestly, like love it or hate it, we still get a lot more people talking about Last Jedi, a lot
Oh yeah.
more than we thought. Again, I don't think it's going to stand the test of time as like Empire Strikes Back has. But it's interesting. Even people I've talked with who've like despised Last Jedi, it's just like we're still talking about the movie,
I was
even if you
actually
hate it.
watching that the other
On.
night. I was actually
Yeah,
watching that the other night. Just flipping through the channels and I happened to see it and I just watched like
yeah,
the last 15 minutes of it. But that
and
budget
even
huge.
Yeah, and even Empire Strikes Back at the time, if I remember correctly, was also a very divisive movie. Like
Mhm.
critics were kind of mixed on it, audiences were very divided on it. Especially the cliffhanger ending is like, what the hell? We expected like another Star Wars movie, and yeah, and nowadays is like this, you know, revolutionary sequel that's pretty much a benchmark for future franchises to be like, especially the action and like comic book franchise we're now in, superhero phase we're in, where it's like, if you want to continue your franchise, you got to do something different and unique like this did.
Yeah.
But before we get into our final thoughts on it,
Mhm.
I actually did have a quick story I want to mention
Go
that's
for it.
going to bleed over into Return of the Jedi, actually, regarding with John Williams. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. Um, Alfred Newman is was the and hold on, wait a minute, just give me a minute to tie back into to what I'm about to get into. So Alfred Newman was the conductor and the guy who originally composed the 20th Century Fox fanfare that we you know we keep hearing and it keeps getting adapted over and over again throughout the years. Um, and he was able to give John Williams his first crack at being a conductor for one of his films. I can't remember on the top of my head what it was, but so, anyways, yeah. So Alfred Newman gave John Williams his shot at, you know, being in the world of music as a conductor, and from that we got, you know, stuff like John Williams did, like Fiddler on the Roof, Jaws, Star Wars, all this stuff. Cut to Return of the Jedi. We get not John Newman. John Williams decides to return the favor for Alfred Newman's son Thomas Newman, who is at the time of this recording is a 15-time Oscar loser. Um, and he has also conducted a lot of films in his own right: American Beauty, Road to Perdition, 1917, Finding Nemo. Wally is another one. He's doing also the new Elemental film, I think, as well. Thomas Newman. Um, and so, anyway, so he gave Thomas Newman his shot at conducting Return of the Jedi. In particular, he did one track in the film. Again, we're probably going to spoil Return of the Jedi, so spoilers again. The track that I'm referring to that Thomas Newman conducted was the piece where Vader has his helmet taken off and he
Mm.
talks to Luke one last time before he passes away. That's the one piece that John Williams allowed Thomas Newman to conduct on the film, and ever since then, Thomas Newman has gotten a lot of credits as a composer. And I always find that a very fascinating story because I'm like, again, just watching it, I'm like, oh wow, he
It's one of the
conducted
most
that piece.
emotional. It's one of the most emotional scenes in the film. It really
Which,
is.
you know what, it's saying a lot because I usually hate Thomas Newman's music like most of the time. I respect him as an artist. I think he seems like a really nice guy and a really cool guy to hang out with. But I am not a fan of Thomas Newman's music, and a lot of it is because of the like emotional, manipulative, like piano baiting kind of stuff I usually hate. And the only time that Thomas Newman, if I could just go on like my little mini rant here, I think I've already said it before, but the only time I've actually been a fan of Thomas Newman's work as a composer was 1917. That's the one time so far where it's like, wow, you're actually creating a score that, it's very much your typical schmaltzy music that you've done, but it's very effective and it helps capture like what you're trying to convey in the film. At least for me, it was. Which is saying a lot that I could say for other Thomas Newman films. And again, even with this one too, it's like he's conducting this. I know he didn't write the music for it, but again, he's conducting this and it's still an emotional, powerful moment. What? So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, that's one of the more potent and powerful emotional scenes in that movie. And it's just, this is, I keep saying this is why this movie is just almost every single critic, almost every single person that has seen this film, when they say rate your Star Wars movies, usually this is in the top one or two. Usually it's either Star Wars or Empire first or second. And it's just, that's why. I mean, for all the things that we listed, and it's just, it's
many more we haven't even touched on.
Yeah, no, there is so much. To the point, Matthew, there are so many things to this movie, and you have to realize that this was 33 years ago, and it's like
more than that, actually.
More than that. Now that I'm thinking about it,
yeah,
and it's just, So I mean.
Also, shout out to the sound designers on this film, especially I think it was Ben Burt was involved on the sound editing process of it, because these films really live or die on the sound work itself, not just the visual effects and the production design.
Those lightsabers, without the sound work, those lightsabers, forget about it.
And even the mixers themselves, even the mixers themselves, they got an Academy Award out of this, working on it, and I'm pretty sure almost the same crew who worked on this won their Oscar again the next year for Raiders of the Lost Ark, I believe. I could be mistaken, but
I mean, that's what ILM does. I mean, they are the perennial.
Well, it's the sound people. ILM is involved with visual effects, but I forgot. Yeah, same crew probably worked on Raiders, I think. So
but okay, guys. So that's Empire Strikes Back. That's a perfect movie for May. So a couple of quick things off the top. As I made mention in today's show, and I'll say it again, I am going to be doing a Mission Impossible rewatch beginning. So I'm going to sit down today, and I'm going to sit down and actually take notes and actively do this. Starting May 2nd, every single Friday moving forward, after May 2nd, you will be getting a new Mission Impossible movie. June 2nd will be Mission Impossible, the 9th, the 2nd, and so on and so forth. On the 17th of this month, so we are 6 days away actually, Avengers Infinity War will be turning 5. So I will be doing a whole video on Avengers Infinity War. The 28th, I believe you said, Return of the Jedi. I will be doing a whole 40th anniversary. I will be going to see Jedi in the theaters, and Matthew, you're more than welcome to come back and talk about Jedi. Spoiler cast, guys. I've already told you we're going to do all these spoiler casts for all these movies. As anybody that's popped in, even momentarily, hit that like and subscribe button, because what that does is that gets us out to everybody, and that's what I'm looking to have done. If you want to support me in a different way, we got a couple different ways. Number one, you've got the join button on the channel, which is only $2.99 a month. Very cheap. It's a cup of coffee. It's less than a gallon of gasoline right now. You got Patreon. At Patreon, you've got two videos. You've got two levels. One is $5, and the other one is $10. For $5, you get monthly. I'll be putting these up. Mob Mondays. The first one I did with screenwriter Brad Rochefort. We did The Departed,
Hmm.
and so we talked all about that and every little thing about it. Rewatch Wednesdays get you both, so you get Mob Mondays and Rewatch Wednesdays, and that's only $10 a month, guys. And so the film that I did to start was Steve Jobs, and we're going to be doing this every single month. And so there's a ton of stuff. Not to mention the shows, guys. You guys are going to be getting the shows, so um, yeah. Just
I
if you don't want to watch the shows, watch the little videos, and
Yeah.
you know. And this will
I
be up May 1st. Go ahead.
I also want to add to anyone out there listening to the Real Talks. I cannot say exactly what, but I believe David and I have some things planned ahead of time in the upcoming months. Not immediate upcoming months, but hopefully down the road. Besides Oscar and awards
Oh
talk
yeah,
down
yeah,
the road, because I've already pitched him a couple ideas that we're still trying to work out to see whether or not they're going to be working. And yeah, I don't want to say too much because, like
yeah,
I
yeah,
said, I don't
yeah.
want to hype our viewers and be like,
No,
"Oh, it's
no,
never going to happen." Sorry, guys.
yeah,
No.
absolutely. So I mean, we have a ton of stuff on the channel, guys, and so I just get get it out there for everybody because this is free. This is better than streaming, and yeah. So all right, he's Matthew Anderson. Oh, by the way, I should ask you before we go. Any last thoughts before we say goodbye for the day?
Yeah, just like I said, just a really great and was it great sequel. Empire Strikes Back is, and it's again like even in just the action genre like Terminator 2 and like Captain America Winter Soldier and stuff that you've already talked about so well in the perfect series in terms of sequels. It's just a big launch point for the series. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a perfect movie, guys. And if you're gonna watch Star Wars, it's almost like you got to watch Empire right after. It's that good. All right. He's Matthew Anderson. I'm David Steele. This has been Perfect Movies, and this has been Real Talks. Take care, guys. Bye bye.